Hello everyone, this is Robin the Delta Crafter and I want to welcome you to a new video on my YouTube channel. Today we're going to be making a one-layer card using a stamp set from the My Monthly Hero May 2020. So here I'm showing you a card sketch that I did with the free downloadable templates that Christina Werner has on her blog. I'll link them below so you can check them out and start using them yourselves. I found that sketching really helps me get my ideas together before I start putting my cards together. So now I'm placing a piece of Nina Classic Crest Solar White cardstock in my Stamp Perfect stamp positioner, and I'm placing my stamp on the card where I would like for it to go. And I need to straighten it out a little bit, so I'm fussing with it just a little bit to make sure I get it straight. I close the door on my Stamp Perfect stamp positioner and make sure that the stamp is adhered to the door pretty well. I'm going to be heat embossing the sentiment on this card, so I'm placing some embossing powder, some anti-static powder on my cardstock and moving that around so that the embossing powder doesn't stick to places that I don't want it to stick. I use VersaFine pigment ink to stamp my sentiment. I'm going to do that a couple of times just to make sure that my sentiment is nice and covered. VersaFine is, like I said earlier, is a pigment ink, which means that it takes longer to dry, and so I'm able to cover the sentiment with embossing powder without having to use Versamark sticky ink. So here I am covering the black VersaFine ink with clear embossing powder. So it's going to make it look like the embossing is black, but it's actually clear on black ink. So I'm hitting that embossing powder with my heat tool just to make sure that it gets nice and melted so that it produces that raised image that embossing does. And I really, really like the results that I get. I hit the back just a little bit to combat that warping that can sometimes happen with embossing. Now I'm going to move on to adding my background. And so for the background of this, I'm going to do clouds. And I just thought it would be fun to make it seem like this sentiment is kind of floating in the clouds. I'm using a very old stencil that I had way back from my scrapbooking days from Fairy Tale Crafts. And this stencil was actually made to be used with chalk. But as my understanding that there is a stencil from My Favorite Things called the Simple Cloud stencil that could be used, purchased and used in the same way. The inks that I'm going to be using for my clouds are Speckled Egg, which is the newest ink in the Distress Ink family, Tumbled Glass, and Broken China. And so with this stencil, I'm just going to move it around a couple of times and use the different colors of ink to put my clouds down. I put the darkest color, which would be Broken China, at the top, because if you look into the sky and the horizon, like it gets darker as the further up you go. Then I move into using Tumbled Glass, and I've used that for a couple of rows of the clouds, and you can see that I'm going around my sentiment there, so it kind of looks like it's going to be floating in the sky. And then I'm going to come in just a minute with the last color, which is the Speckled Egg. And so that using those three colors is going to give some gradient color imaging to my background, which I really, really like. And I like that this stencil gives me options on, so my clouds aren't just all exactly the same. This stencil also has other things on it, like mountains and sunrise or sunset that can be used and put down on a card, and maybe I'll use those later. So I have started to dabble in alcohol markers. And if you know anything about alcohol markers, they can be quite expensive to get into. So what I have here are some Spectrum Noir markers. I was able to find these at Tuesday Morning here in my local area for a set of them at a very, very decent price. So I was able to purchase these markers and give alcohol inks a try before I make a real, deep investment in them, only to find out that I don't like them, or I don't particularly want to do that much work, because in order to get your really, really beautiful images that we all love that are done with alcohol markers, like, it's a lot of work, and you have to have a lot of colors to blend together in order to get the results that you're looking for. So I purchased these and I'm giving them a try, and so far so good. I mean, they're my first alcohol marker, so I have nothing to compare them to. But as far as using them and the technique and the look that I get, I like them. So here's my finished colored in sentiment, and so I really like that, like pop of color. I'm working on really embellishing and like taking my cards up to the next level. So what I'm doing here is I have a Spectrum Noir sparkle pen, and it is just a clear, sparkly ink that can be added to over top any color or any cardstock, anywhere that you want to put it, just to give a little slight sparkle to your designs. So I'm going around the edges of my clouds and adding this sparkle pen into it, and I'll show you in just a minute what that looks like. Any sparkle pen that you may have, or sparkle gel that you may have, would work. This is what I have, so this is what I used. And here you can see, as I tilt the card in the light, you can see just a bit of sparkle and shimmer that the sparkle pen gives to my clouds, and I really, really like that. So now I'm going to attach my card base to my panel to my card base. I like to use craft foam. It's an inexpensive way to give your cards a little bit of dimension, as well as give you a full coverage across the back of your card, versus using foam tape, which if you use that, you have to use a lot of strips of foam tape, as well as there will be some divots or some areas that don't get coverage. And so the craft foam works really, really nicely, and I like the way that it works. I do still use foam tape, as well as foam dots and foam squares, but for large panels like this, craft foam is what I go to. So I'm just fixing my card base, which is also a piece of Neenah Classic Crest 80-pound cardstock in Solar White. And then I'm adding my Scotch Quickset glue to it. And I like that glue a lot. I've had that bottle for quite a while. It's getting to the bottom, so I'm about to have to purchase a new one, but it still works. So here's my finished card. It's a one-panel card again, one-layer card, and I really, really like the image and the way the clouds come together and the varying colors, and then the striking sentiment that's in the middle. I hope you've enjoyed this video today. If you have, please give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing and hitting the notification bell. You can also find me on Instagram and Facebook at The Delta Crafter. Have a great day, everyone.